How long has it been since you last stood at the cemetery where the one you loved most rests? Life pushed you far away. Between you and that grave, there is an ocean, a border, 1,000 miles you cannot cross when you wish you could. Every time an important date comes around, you feel something in your chest you cannot even put a name to. A strange guilt bites you without reason, and it flares up the moment you see their photo on the wall and you think about that grave where you are not. Saint Teresa of Jesus carried this same pain in her own flesh, silently, for years. And she left written something that almost no one has read about what happens when the living love from far away. Then comes the question that hurts even more, the one you have ducked every time it crossed your mind. If your heart is over there but your body is here, if you pray for her every night and yet you cannot kneel beside her headstone, is that enough for the soul that was hoping to hear your footsteps? Before we go on, I want to ask you for something. Write to me below in the comments in which city or in which country lies the grave you can no longer visit, and how long it has been since you last managed to return. Do it to let the weight go. So tonight, you are not alone with that wound. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew sons and daughters who buried their parents far away and never managed to return to the home village. What she taught them across many years was kept safe in these pages I am going to open with you. And you need to hear all of it because each part holds up the one after it. There is a truth of faith you are going to need before anything else, because without it, nothing that follows will make sense. The soul of your departed loved one is not in the grave. The grave holds the remains of the body, that flesh you once embraced, those hands that held yours, that face you learned to recognize from the cradle. The soul, on the other hand, left at the very moment of the final breath, and she presented herself alone before the Lord. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote about this in many different ways across her life. In her pages of the interior castle, she describes the soul as a beautiful dwelling place made by God, able to rise and descend through rooms that have nothing to do with the geography of this world. The soul, she says, travels inwardly toward her Creator. That was always her great teaching. And so, when a person dies in the state of grace, the soul stays wherever God has chosen to receive her. Perhaps she is already in heaven, enjoying the face of God. Perhaps she is in purgatory, awaiting the purification that will prepare her for heaven. What the Catechism teaches, what the Church has held since the Apostles, what Saint Teresa of Avila lived in her most intimate visions. The soul keeps living fully aware, outside the body you buried. That teaching runs through 2,000 years of Catholic faith with a steady, firm voice. Everything else you are going to hear this afternoon rests on it, so it is worth fixing in your heart before we go further. Stop here for a moment, because this changes everything. When you go to the cemetery and pray in front of the headstone, you are speaking to a soul that lives in God's order of things, a soul that God Himself allows to hear your plea. That is the mystery of the communion of saints. The souls of our loved ones, living souls, can receive our prayer no matter where they are. And we, also living, can come to their aid with suffrages no matter how many miles separate us from the cemetery where the body lies. That means, word for word, that a Mass offered from Chicago reaches the soul of your mother buried in Michoacán just as completely as if you had offered it in the parish of your hometown. It means that a rosary prayed on your knees in your kitchen in Madrid helps with the same force the soul of your father resting in a cemetery in Lima. It means that the offering you leave on Sunday in a church in Bilbao for the rest of the soul of your sister, buried in Caracas, reaches that soul with the same spiritual weight as if you had left it before her headstone. God measures souls. Miles fall short with Him. Where you cannot go with your feet, the Lord carries your full intention, and not 1 ounce of love is lost along the way. Miles belong to the world of the body. The soul of your departed loved one lives now completely outside space, as we know it down here. And then comes the question that has been burning inside you for months, maybe for years. If all that is true, if the suffrages cross oceans, if the prayer arrives whole wherever you happen to be, then why does it hurt so badly that you cannot go? Why does that weight settle on your chest every time you think about that distant grave? Why does the guilt keep biting if you really are doing everything God asks? Because there is something more, my dear, something subtler, something Saint Teresa of Jesus understood in her own flesh, and that very few theologians have managed to explain after her. There is a particular pain in the soul of the departed that masses at a distance, on their own, leave only half healed. There is a wound that opens up when the loved ones who care for that soul are stranded on the other side of the world. A wound that has a name. A wound that, thank God, has a real remedy. A nun from the convent in Toledo came one winter afternoon to the parlor where Saint Teresa of Avila received the daughters who carried old wounds. The nun was a novice and had entered Carmel after burying her mother in Seville. She could not go back. The rule, the distances, the dusty roads of the 16th century, the poverty of the convents, everything conspired so that grave of her mother would never see her daughter alive again. And the novice asked, weeping, "Mother, my mother was laid in the ground without my hands being there. Have I lost her in God's eyes as well?" Saint Teresa of Jesus answered her with that slowness of hers she always took before speaking about deep matters. "My daughter," she said, "there's a pain in your mother's soul that nobody has told you about. I will explain it to you carefully because you need to understand the whole of it." That conversation was kept in the memory of the community and crossed 4 centuries to reach us through preserved letters and the testimony of the sisters who heard her speak. What Saint Teresa of Avila said that afternoon to the novice is exactly what you need to hear right now. It is going to open up for you a truth about the soul of your departed loved one that will change the way you pray for him from the moment you finish this video. Stay with me. What is coming is hard, and it is also freedom. The guilt you carry has a name, and you will stop carrying it blindly. The wound of the soul of the loved one who lies far from you has an explanation that very few present-day pastors have managed to pass on to their flock. And above all, Saint Teresa of Jesus mapped out step by step a real path of consolation for the sons and daughters who love from a distance. A path that fits entirely within the walls of the home where you live now. A path that does not ask you to cross one single border to reach the soul of the one you keep loving on the other side of the world. It was a winter afternoon in Toledo when Saint Teresa of Jesus lowered her voice to answer the novice. The light came in poor through the grills of the parlor and left on the tiles 2 quiet shadows, that of the founding mother and that of the young woman who had left her mother buried in Seville. Saint Teresa of Avila did not look at the floor. She looked the novice in the eyes and began speaking slowly, the way someone holds in their hands something fragile that must not be dropped. "My daughter," she said, "there are 2 kinds of absence, and it is good for you to tell them apart before you go on carrying guilt that does not belong to you. The first is the absence of the one who could perfectly well come closer and prefers to stay in their routine. The son who lives in the same city where his father is buried and never stops by the cemetery. The sister who has the grave half an hour away by car and chooses the shopping mall on Sunday morning. The nephew who only remembers his departed uncle when somebody mentions the inheritance. That absence carries real spiritual weight. The soul of the departed one feels it, says Saint Teresa of Jesus, with a weight much like the coldness of forgetfulness among the living. That indifference hurts because it reveals something deeper, my dear. The love in the heart of the living one has gone out, and a soul in purgatory knows perfectly well how to read the temperature of the love of her people. She notices when the name of the departed one slowly disappears from family conversations. She notices when no one puts the photograph on the wall anymore, when the anniversaries pass without a single candle, when the grandchildren grow up never hearing who that grandfather or grandmother was. That perception, in the soul still being purified, opens a very deep wound. There exists another absence, and that one, my daughter, looks very little like the first. It belongs to the one who loves and cannot get there. The daughter who buried her mother in Michoacan and now lives serving in a house in Chicago, washing other people's clothes to send money back to the younger siblings, with no papers to cross the border home. The husband who lost his wife in Caracas and immigrated to Miami with the children fleeing hunger, knowing he will never again pray in front of that headstone. The elderly mother who buried her only son in Lima and moved to Madrid with her other daughter because she could no longer live alone. And from that day on, the cemetery in Lima sat 7,000 miles from her prayer chair. Those sons, those husbands, those mothers who carry the guilt of the one who cannot return live under a weight completely different from that of guilty forgetting. It is worth understanding this calmly. The soul of the departed one, Saint Teresa of Avila made clear, knows the difference between the heart that grew cold and the heart that burns from far away. One of the particular graces God grants to the souls in purgatory is this: knowing clearly where the prayer they receive comes from, and knowing with the same clarity why the prayer that is missing does not come. The soul of your mother, my daughter, knows whether you are not coming because you do not want to or because you cannot. She knows it without a shadow of doubt, and that alone should lift a great weight from your chest this very afternoon. Stop here for a moment, my dear, because this matters for you who are listening. If you live far from the grave of your departed loved one, and you pray for his soul, and you light candles for him, and you have masses said for him in parishes around the world, his soul knows you keep loving him with everything you have. You have not forgotten him. You have not turned your back on him. The only thing that has happened is that your body is tied to a geography you did not choose, and that body cannot drag you right now to the cemetery where he rests. And that, before God, gets a very different reception than what comes from the one who lives 3 blocks away and never shows up. The novice in Toledo listened to those words and began to breathe deeper, like someone who for the first time in many months can finally drop her shoulders. Saint Teresa of Jesus left her there in silence for a long while, and then she said, "But my daughter, there is more. There is something your mother, wherever she is now, is missing. Something the masses you have sent from Toledo, beautiful as they are, do not quite reach. I will explain to you what it is, because that piece is what is going to change everything in your prayer life. The same I say to you who are listening now. Your departed loved one over there knows you love him. His soul is not accusing you. God sees that soul the way he sees you, and he understands perfectly what your life is. Take that fear out of your chest right now while you hear my voice. And keep this also. There is a subtle lack the soul of your departed does feel when the loved ones who care for her are far away. A lack that masses from a distance reach, but do not entirely satisfy. And that lack is exactly what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught her daughters to heal from the very home of the living one, with no ocean to cross. What Saint Teresa of Avila taught that afternoon lives on in the substance of her writings on prayer, and has consoled thousands of distant sons and daughters across 4 centuries. It is going to console you too, this very night. What comes on the next page of this teaching is worth more than every plane ticket you cannot pay for and every border you cannot cross. Because what your departed loved one is waiting for today is exactly that you learn this. And when you learn it, that sticky guilt that wakes you in the small hours is going to start letting you go. Slowly, the way an old cloth finally tears between fingers, tired from gripping it for so long. What is it then that the soul whose loved one lives in another country is missing? The question deserves a clear answer with no pious detours. What that soul in purgatory is missing, she misses in a very particular way. She misses the concrete shape of the love the living one has for her. Saint Teresa of Jesus explains this rather plainly in her The Way of Perfection, where she insists again and again that true love of neighbor, whether living or departed, needs to take flesh in concrete works. The love that lives only in the heart, with no hands to touch with, no voice to speak with, no gestures to hold it up, ends up half done. The mystical doctor never tires of repeating it to her nuns. Love in the abstract dilutes itself. Love without gesture grows cold. And she gives one more warning, which is worth hearing carefully because it applies just as much to dealings with the living as to dealings with the souls in purgatory. True love, when it comes from God, always seeks to take flesh in works, in audible words, in gestures anyone can point at with a finger. Because that is how the Lord loved us, with a body, with hands, with a voice, with blood that could be seen as it was poured out. That same law applies to your bond with the soul of your departed loved one. You love him. Your heart is full of him, of her, of the memory that hugs you from inside when you least expect it. And yet that love in the heart, if it finds no concrete form to make its way to the soul of the departed, arrives weakened. It arrives, of course it arrives, because God supplies what the living one cannot give. It just arrives half full. My daughter, what the soul of your departed is missing is something very concrete, the small material forms of the love of the living. The candle lit with his name written on a folded piece of paper underneath. The prayer spoken aloud where his name is pronounced. The Mass requested in the sacristy with both his last names and the date of his death. The offering handed in for him and by his name. Those small gestures, which look like very little, are the body of the love that the soul of the departed needs to receive from the sight of the living. Saint Teresa of Avila lived this in her own flesh when her father, Don Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda, died in Avila in the year 1543. She was still in the convent of the Incarnation, and although she was able to say goodbye to him on his deathbed, the years of foundations that came afterward kept her away from the city for long stretches at a time. There were whole summers when she could not visit her father's tomb. There were anniversaries when the mule was carrying her along the roads of Andalusia, while her heart stayed in a church in Avila where she could not kneel. And although Avila was her city, in the last years of her life she had to live far from her father's grave. Founding houses in Andalusia, crossing Castile with her carts pulled by mules, far from that father she loved so dearly, she discovered in her own prayer that the love of the heart needed to come out in concrete forms to reach the soul of Don Alonso. That is why, wherever she founded a new Carmel, she had masses celebrated with her father's name spoken aloud. She lit candles for him in every new chapel. She asked the sisters to pray for him out loud in the choir at every dawn. She did it because she knew something very deep. The soul of her father, wherever he was, felt each one of those concrete gestures like arms wrapping around her from afar. And that perception, in the soul still being purified, is worth more than 1,000 loves kept in the silence of the living one's heart. And here comes the truth that stings a little, my daughter, and you need to hear it before we go on. If for months or years you have been loving your departed loved one in silence inside your heart, without ever giving that love a single material form, a candle with his name, a prayer spoken aloud with both his last names, a mass requested for him in the sacristy of the parish where you live now, then your love was there. Your love exists. Your love you saw with your own eyes when you cried in secret as you walked past the photographs. Your love is alive and beats every night when you pray looking at the ceiling. And even so, that love arrived half full to the soul of the departed, because it lacked a body, it lacked a gesture, it lacked the concrete form that the soul on the other side can perceive and give thanks for. I am not telling you this to wound you. I am telling you because the news brings relief right behind the first pinch. You are still in time. This very night, before going to bed, you can give the soul of your departed loved one exactly what she has been waiting for all this time. A candle lit in the kitchen, a name written on a small piece of paper, a prayer spoken aloud where that name is pronounced with all the family names. A mass requested tomorrow morning in the parish closest to the home where you live now, even if that parish stands 7,000 miles from the cemetery where the body lies. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood this in one of the hardest trials of her life, and she is going to tell us now, in the next part of this teaching, how exactly she came across this path for the sons and daughters who love from far away. Stay with me, my dear. What comes next is going to give a new shape to your prayer for the soul of the one you have far from your body and close to your heart. And it is going to put real tools in your hands that fit within the home where you live now. Tools you already have within reach tonight. Even though you have not yet recognized them as bridges that cross oceans to reach the soul you keep on hoping to see again whenever God so decides. It was the year 1567 when Saint Teresa of Jesus climbed for the first time onto a mule to begin the long journey toward Medina del Campo, leaving Avila behind and, with Avila, also the grave of her father, Don Alonso. She was 52. 2 sisters and a priest went with her. The awareness of the spiritual weight of that journey pressed on her shoulders with every league of the dusty road. It was no easy farewell, my dear, although the saint never put it in those words. She let it show in her pages of the book of her foundations, where she describes the pains and the graces she received throughout those years of journeys across Castile. And among those pains, without quite naming it aloud, there grew a very fine awareness. The awareness that her soul could no longer run to the tomb of her loved ones every time an anniversary brushed her heart. Her father had been buried in Avila for more than 20 years when she began those foundations. Her mother, Doña Beatriz, rested somewhere else. Brothers of hers had died in the Indies, in faraway places her body would never reach. And as the new foundations kept taking her through Castile, through Andalusia, through lands ever further from her native Avila, she came to discover in her mental prayer that she had to find a new way of dealing with the souls of her dead, a way that did not need her body present beside the family graves, and at the same time, a way that fit entirely inside the heart of the discalced Carmel she kept founding wherever the Lord asked her to put down another root. What Saint Teresa of Avila discovered during those journeys is told in small scattered lines across the book of her foundations and in some preserved letters she sent to her spiritual daughters. She herself recounts that she made a habit of it. Each dawn, before any other prayer, she would gather herself in interior silence, and there, inside that dwelling place of the soul she would later explain at length in the interior castle, she would offer the Lord the name of each one of her departed loved ones. Don Alonso, Doña Beatriz, her brothers lost in the Indies. She would say them aloud one by one, even when she was alone in the cell. She would write them on small pieces of paper she kept inside a breviary. She always lit a little candle next to the image of the crucified before going out to the mule waiting for her. In winter, when the Castilian air cut at her face, she did it with red hands and clumsy fingers. In summer, when the dust of the roads was already coming in through the grills, she did it with a voice gone hoarse from reciting prayers along the way. And the gesture was always the same. And the soul of Don Alonso, somewhere in the world beyond, felt that candle lit by a daughter who could no longer kneel beside his grave. She did this, my daughter, for 2 reasons it is good for you to understand clearly. The first, to support her own love wounded by distance with a material gesture, an audible word, a concrete object she could come back to each dawn. The second, because she knew, by an inner revelation received in prayer, that her gesture crossed the distance with a particular spiritual force. The suffrage offered from far away, with the awareness of the distance and the grief folded into the prayer, carries a spiritual density that the comfortable suffrage of the one who has the grave half a block away sometimes does not even reach. God measures hearts, my daughter. And to the heart that carries the geographical impossibility as a cross accepted and turns it into daily prayer, He grants a new intimacy with the soul of the departed. Here Saint Teresa of Jesus opens up a consoling truth that almost no one will have ever explained to you. Your geographical distance, offered to the Lord every time you pray for the soul of your departed, becomes a form of penance worth more before God than you imagine. Every time you think about that cemetery where you cannot go and, instead of sinking into the guilt, you lift up the prayer for the soul of the one who rests there, you are offering a suffrage of rare spiritual quality, a suffrage the soul of the departed receives as a consolation of double weight, because she knows what that prayer of yours costs you, because she knows your heart returns every day to a cemetery your feet cannot tread. Saint Teresa of Avila also discovered, during those years of foundations, that inside her own cell, she could build a sacred space for dealings with the souls of distant departed loved ones. An intimate space, small, made of a few objects, an image, a candle, a little piece of paper with a name, a breviary. That space became an interior access to the soul of the departed that no journey on muleback and no ocean could interrupt. It was, in her own words, a chapel of the heart opened over the loved souls she could no longer visit in body. And now comes the question that belongs to you, my daughter. How do I build that interior access in my own home? How do I raise, within the walls where I live now, a small sacred space from which my prayer reaches the soul of the loved one I left on the other side of the world? What objects, what images, what concrete forms does that corner need so that the soul of my mother, my father, my husband, my child can sense from the other side that I have not forgotten her, that every day I keep coming to meet her, even though my feet cannot tread the ground where her body rests? Saint Teresa of Jesus left a concrete answer for each one of those questions. And I am going to hand it over to you now, step by step, before this video ends and before you turn off the light tonight. Come with me to a corner of your home, any corner you choose. It can be the shelf where you keep your mother's rosary. It can be the small table by the kitchen window where you sit to drink your coffee in the morning. It can be the nightstand in the bedroom. The important thing is that you see it every day without having to look for it. That corner is going to be, from now on, the chapel of the heart made into an object. The one Saint Teresa of Jesus described as the interior access to the soul of the departed. Only here, instead of staying inside the soul, it takes a body in your home, with things any neighbor could look at without understanding much of what is happening there. What will you put in that corner? I'm going to tell you slowly, step by step, because every piece matters. First, a sacred image. An image of the crucified, or an image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, or an image of the Sacred Heart. Whichever your heart asks for, that image comes first, because the soul of the departed does not reach you directly. She reaches you through the mediation of Christ and of Mary. That is why the sacred image goes ahead of any photograph. It works like a holy door through which everything you offer from that corner passes. Second, a photograph of the departed. A photograph where the face shows clearly, the eyes open, a smile if she had one. A photograph from the funeral or from the final days of illness does not belong here. What this corner asks for is a photograph that holds the person the way you want to remember her in the presence of the Lord. That photograph goes behind the sacred image, never in front, because your departed loved one in this corner is being entrusted to God. Third, a folded slip of paper where you will have written her full name, both her last names, the date of her birth, and the date of her death. If you cannot recall the exact date of death, write the month and the year. If you cannot recall both dates, write only her name. The slip matters because it holds the prayer with written words, the intention clear and named. That slip can go under the sacred image, inside the breviary, or taped to the back of the frame. Fourth, a candle. It does not have to be big. A little candle, the kind sold in any supermarket. The important thing is that it sits there in the corner, ready to be lit whenever you decide. The candle does a real job. It works as prayer made light, a material gesture that says before God and before the soul of the departed, I am here with you in this light I am offering. Fifth and last, if you have it, and if your confessor approves, a small bottle with holy water. Just a few drops will be enough. Holy water, in the Catholic tradition, recalls the baptism of the departed loved one, that first grace that keeps bearing fruit in the soul, now being purified. If you do not have any, the next time you go to church, ask the priest to bless a little for you to take home. With those 5 elements, you already have your home altar, the chapel of the heart given a body, made of simple objects that hold up your prayer for the soul of the departed you left behind. Nothing here has anything to do with magic or with superstition. Just very old Catholic signs that hold up the love you already carry in your chest. Saint Teresa of Avila would have recognized this corner without hesitation. She would have seen in it the very corner she used to build in each new cell of each Carmel she founded across Castile. Now comes the most important part, how to use this altar. Because having the object sitting there, gathering dust with no living use, would be almost as useless as not having them at all. The altar has 3 moments of use, my daughter. 3 times when your prayer for the soul of the distant departed lights up with particular strength. The first moment is each morning on waking. Before you check the phone, before you start the day, you come close to the corner. You light the candle for 1 minute, no more. And you say aloud the full name of the departed, asking the Lord for her soul. That fits in 60 seconds, and it consecrates the whole day to that intention. The second moment is each night before going to bed. You come close to the corner again. If you did not light the candle in the morning, you light it now. You say an Our Father and a Hail Mary for the soul of the departed. 3 minutes, 4 at most. And you blow out the candle slowly, knowing that small light crossed oceans that night to reach the soul of the one you loved. The third moment, and this is the most important one for you who live far away, is for the marked dates, the anniversary of her death, her birthday, the day of her named saint, November 2nd, the day of the faithful departed. On those dates, the home altar becomes the center of your whole spiritual day. And what happens on those dates in front of the altar weighs in the soul of the departed as much as 100 visits to the cemetery would weigh. But there is a question we have not yet answered, my daughter. The question your heart is already forming right now. If I cannot reach the cemetery where the body rests, can I somehow arrange for someone in that faraway church, in that parish of my mother's village, to offer the highest Mass for her soul? Is it possible for the Mass itself, the one that holds a power no other prayer holds in the Catholic faith, to reach the soul of my departed through a priest who celebrates in her land while I kneel in mine? The answer is yes, my daughter. And Saint Teresa of Jesus left this possibility explained with a clarity that is going to surprise you. Picture for a moment that faraway parish where the grave of your departed lies. Close your eyes for a second, my dear. That little church in your mother's village, that cathedral in the neighborhood where your father grew up, that mountain chapel where your brother was buried. Picture the priest going up to the altar, dressed in his vestments, opening the missal on the lectern. And now picture that priest in the middle of the offertory, speaking the full name of your departed aloud. That is possible, my daughter. and that is what we are going to learn now. The Mass is, in the Catholic faith, the supreme suffrage for the departed. No prayer of the Christian is worth as much before God as a single Mass offered for the soul of the one who left. Saint Teresa of Jesus taught this to her nuns with words of fire. A single Mass, in substance, she would say, does more for the soul of the departed than 1,000 rosaries prayed in private devotion. Because at the Mass, the prayer of the living one does not reach the soul of the departed alone. At the Mass, Christ himself offers himself to the Father for the soul of the departed, and the blood of the Lord, poured out in the chalice, bathes the soul of the one being purified in purgatory with an effectiveness no other Catholic prayer holds. That is why, when we speak of suffrages at a distance, the Mass takes the first place. Above the rosary prayed at home, above the offering given to the poor, above the fasts offered up, above the candles lit in front of the home altar, the Mass crowned everything. And it crowned everything precisely because the Mass crosses distance like nothing else does in this world. Now listen carefully, my daughter, to how a Mass can reach the soul of your departed from the very parish where the body rests, even though you are 7,000 miles away. It is simpler than you think. There are two paths, and it is good for you to know them both. The first path is the one you have within reach without leaving the house. You go to the parish closest to you, you speak with the priest or with the parish secretary, and you request a Mass for the soul of your departed loved one. You give the full name, both last names, the date of death if you remember it. You pay the usual offering, the one called by a different name in every country, but everywhere goes to support the priest in his ministry. And the next day, or the day the priest tells you, that Mass will be celebrated in your own parish with your departed as the intention. You can be there if you want, kneel down, receive communion for her soul. And that Mass, my daughter, reaches the soul of the departed in full wherever the body may be. That Mass crosses the ocean without you having to cross it. The second path is the one very few people know about, and it is worth learning because it consoles the heart in a particular way. You can arrange for a Mass in the faraway parish, the one near the grave of the departed, without leaving the home where you live now. How? Nowadays, thanks be to God, almost every parish in the world has a telephone, an email address, a website. You call or you write to the parish in your mother's village, you speak with the parish priest or with the secretary, you request a Mass for the soul of the departed loved one. You send the offering by money order or by transfer, whichever they are able to receive, and on a certain day, the priest of that parish will go up to the altar and speak your mother's name aloud before God. And then something beautiful happens, my daughter. Something Saint Teresa of Avila would have celebrated with tears in her eyes. You, in your home in Chicago, or Madrid, or Buenos Aires, kneel down in front of the home altar you already have prepared. You light the candle. You speak the name of the departed. And while you are doing this, 7,000 miles away, in the parish of the village, the priest lifts the chalice with the blood of Christ and speaks the same name. Distance, in that moment, stops mattering, because the Mass is one and the same throughout the whole church. And the two of you, you here and he over there, are taking part in the same sacrifice. That happens for real, my daughter, in plain Catholic teaching. There is a third possibility worth mentioning, especially if your departed lies in a very isolated region where the parish is poor and the priests few. You can arrange for Gregorian Masses, that series of 30 consecutive Masses for one same soul that the Catholic tradition has offered since the days of Saint Gregory the Great. Gregorian Masses are arranged in Benedictine, Carthusian, or Carmelite monasteries. They cost more than a single Mass because they are 30. But their effect on the soul of the departed, as the Catholic tradition has taught for 14 centuries, holds a particular power. If you have the means and you feel the soul of your departed is especially in need, this option is a treasure worth considering with your confessor. What matters that you understand, my daughter, before we close this teaching on the Mass that crosses oceans, is that no cemetery in the world stands beyond the reach of your prayer once that prayer takes the shape of a Mass. The Eucharist is the bridge. The Eucharist is what unites the soul of the departed with your living heart, no matter how many time zones come between you. Now, my daughter, there is another part of this teaching that also touches your soul, because beyond the Masses, there is a spiritual calendar the soul of the distant departed waits for from you, and it is worth knowing so you do not let slip the dates that weigh most in heaven. Saint Teresa of Jesus drew it out with care for her Carmelite daughters who had distant departed, and you are going to recognize it the moment you hear it. There are 6 dates in the year the soul of your distant departed watches with particular attention. 6 days when the heart of the one who left is especially sensitive to what arrives or fails to arrive from your living hands, my daughter. It is worth learning to mark all 6 in your home calendar, because not one of the 6 asks much of you. Each one asks for a precise gesture, a named prayer, a candle lit in front of the altar in your home. And together, year after year, they build an accompaniment the soul of the departed receives like fresh water on parched ground. The first date is the anniversary of his death. For this one, no complicated math is needed. Write down in your calendar the exact day he or she left this world, and every year, when that date comes back around, the whole morning belongs to him. You request a Mass for his soul a week or 2 ahead of time. You attend, you receive communion for him, you go back home, you light the candle in front of the home altar, and you spend a while in silence in front of his photograph, saying his name aloud and reminding the Lord how much you loved him. The Catholic tradition has always taught that the anniversary of death is one of the days when the soul of the departed receives suffrages with special effectiveness. Saint Teresa of Jesus kept it scrupulously every year, even when she was traveling on muleback along dusty roads. The second date is the birthday of the departed, the day he or she came into the world. At first glance, it might seem the date of birth no longer matters because the person is no longer here to blow out candles. In reality, the opposite is true. The soul of the departed remembers with particular tenderness the day she received the gift of human life. And when her living loved ones honor that day with a prayer, a candle, and Our Father spoken aloud in front of the home altar, the soul of the departed feels the embrace of heaven in a way you have to experience to understand. The third date is the day of the saint whose name the departed bore. If your mother's name was Maria del Carmen, July 16th is her day. If your father's name was Jose, March 19th is his. If your brother's name was Juan, June 24th, and so on with each one. The patron saint whose name went with the departed throughout his life keeps on being his particular intercessor in heaven. And that saint, on his own day, gives special attention to the soul of the one who carried his name through the streets of this earth. If you, on that day, offer a candle, a prayer, a Mass for the soul of your departed, the patron saint adds his voice to your plea before God, and the soul of the departed receives a double consolation. The fourth date is November 2nd, the Day of the Faithful Departed, called in many Spanish-speaking lands the Day of the Dead. This day belongs to all the souls in purgatory, and in particular to yours, my daughter. To the soul you have carried in your chest for months or for years, the one you left buried on the other side of the world. On November 2nd, it is worth setting up the home altar with particular care, extra candles, white flowers if you have them. A Mass offered specifically for your departed, and not for the souls in purgatory in general. And if you have young children or grandchildren at home, say the name of the departed in their presence that morning. Tell a story, an anecdote, something that makes the departed human in the eyes of the little ones. That stretches the memory, my dear, and memory is one of the foods of the soul of the one who left. The fifth date is November 1st, the Day of All Saints. This date is less known in its application to the departed, and it is worth bringing into your home calendar. The Day of All Saints celebrates those who already enjoy heaven, and the Catholic prayer of that day also includes those who are still on their way to heaven, those being purified in purgatory. A candle lit on that day in front of the altar in your home, with the intention that your departed be soon counted among the saints, moves the whole of heaven on behalf of his soul. And the sixth date, my daughter, is the one almost nobody puts in their calendar, but which carries a special weight in the Carmelite tradition. It falls on the second Sunday of Easter, called by St. John Paul II the Sunday of Divine Mercy. On that day, according to a promise Christ made to St. Faustina Kowalska, the souls who come close to the fountain of mercy receive particular graces. If you, on that Sunday, offer your communion for the soul of your departed, and you pray the chaplet of divine mercy in front of the home altar, the soul of the departed receives a torrent of grace. It is worth not letting pass year after year. Those are the 6 dates, my daughter: anniversary of death, birthday, day of the name, saint, November 2nd, November 1st, Sunday of Divine Mercy. 6 dates that make up the spiritual calendar of the soul of the distant departed. 6 dates the soul herself watches with particular sensitivity. And 6 dates you can honor every one of them from the home where you live now without crossing one single border. But perhaps, my daughter, in this moment you are feeling something it is worth naming before we go on. A shadow has been pressing against your chest while I have been explaining all this. The shadow of the guilt that keeps biting, even though I have told you already it does not belong to you. The guilt of the one who went far away, the guilt of the emigrant. And of that guilt, my daughter, it is worth speaking slowly, because it has deeper roots than it shows at first glance. If I had not left, if I had stayed over there with her, if her hand could have held mine that last afternoon. Those are the words, my daughter, that wake you at 3 a.m. with your chest wet in cold sweat. Those are the lines that come back to your head every time you see an old photograph, every time you hear a song from her country, every time someone asks you where you come from. The guilt of the one who went far away has a night face no other pain of the human heart has. It is worth looking it in the eye before we close what we came here to receive this afternoon. You did not leave on a whim, my daughter. Say this to yourself with a firm voice in front of the mirror when that guilt comes pressing back. You left because life pushed you toward a new shore. Young children to feed asked for a wage your country could not give. Your husband's illness needed treatments not available over there. The violence of the neighborhood was taking the young men one after another, and yours could not stay out in the open like that. The countryside had gone hostile, and the work had vanished. The providence of God put a plane ticket in your hands and certain tasks for you to carry out on the other side of the sea. That, my daughter, has a very specific name before God: obedience to providence. Take the word betrayal out of your head, because that word does not fit what happened to you. Your leaving had another source. Saint Teresa of Jesus explained this to her nuns with words it is worth remembering slowly. Obedience to the will of God, she would say, in the substance gathered by her daughters, always carries burdens that look to the eyes of the world like abandonment, and are in reality crosses of the Lord laid on the shoulders of the soul who loves. Leaving one's people behind out of an inner obedience, be it a religious vocation, a move made out of necessity, a faraway job that supports the family, is a sacrifice God counts in detail, and no angel forgets to mark it in the book of trials accepted. Your leaving, my daughter, in the eyes of God is written down in that book, and the soul of your departed, from the place where she now finds herself, knows it perfectly. because the souls in purgatory see with a new clarity the providence that governed their own lives while they were on earth. And as they see it, they understand why you had to leave while they were still alive. They understand why later you could not return for the burial. They understand why since then you have not been able to go back to the grave. All that, my dear, they see with a clarity you here on earth can barely guess. The soul of your mother does not reproach you for having emigrated. That of your father does not blame you for not having been at his final bed. And the soul of your husband, wherever he is, looks at the distance that Providence placed between you without accusing you of anything. If your heart is being tortured by those lines that wake you in the small hours, those lines come from somewhere else. They come from the enemy who knows how to get the upper hand out of the pain of true love. They also come from wounded self-love that resists accepting that Providence had other plans. And in some cases, they spring from advice from people poorly informed about the Catholic theology of the world beyond. People who have made you believe that missing the physical cemetery amounts to failing the soul of the departed, which we have already seen has nothing to do with the doctrine of the Church. The true moral guilt, the kind that does need confession and reparation, comes from deliberate acts against love. You did not deliberately fail in love for your departed. You emigrated forced by circumstances, and you remain far away, tied by commitments Providence has placed on your shoulders. The guilt that bites you in the small hours, my daughter, has no real moral substance. What it has is the substance of the pain of exile, that deep longing the human soul feels when she lives far from her roots. And that pain does not need confession. It needs company, and it needs prayer. I invite you, my daughter, to perform tonight a small personal ceremony in front of the home altar I have already described for you. Light the candle, speak the full name of the departed, and say to him or to her aloud, as if she were listening to you from the side of God, I did not abandon you. Providence brought me here, and from here I keep loving you with everything I am. And say also to the Lord, in that same prayer, Lord, accept my geographical distance as a suffrage for her soul. May every mile between me and her grave be counted as a spiritual offering for her eternal rest. That small ceremony, my dear, is going to release slowly the guilt you have been carrying. It is going to loosen the lines that wake you in the small hours. And it is going to ease the weight you have been hauling for months or years. In its place, it is going to open a new peace. The soul of the departed is going to celebrate with you from the side of heaven. Because that soul wants to see you free. She wants to see you praying without the shadow of guilt over your shoulder. And she wants you to know the love between you remains intact, now and always, no matter how many miles separate you on the map. And with this, my daughter, we come to the end of what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught about the love that keeps crossing oceans when the bodies no longer can. Before I take my leave of you this afternoon, I want to gather for you in a single look everything you have received, so you can take it whole with you to bed tonight and tomorrow. When you wake, the path will already be drawn inside your chest with all its steps. My daughter, if you reached this point, I want you to know something before I tell you anything else. Very few people have the courage to sit down and receive a truth that hurts before it consoles. You did it. And that already says a great deal about the quality of the love you carry in your chest for the soul you have far away. Few hold up under hearing that their love arrived half full for years. Few stay with the candle lit in their hands when the flame also lights up the cracks in their own walls. What you received this afternoon, my dear, is going to change the way you relate to the soul of your departed forever. You know now that the soul does not dwell in the grave. You know now that your physical absence from the cemetery does not have the moral weight you had given it. You know now that the soul of the departed knows the difference between the heart that grew cold and the one still burning from far away. Yours is the second. You learned that the love of the heart needs concrete form to arrive with all its weight. And now you have the forms: the home altar with its 5 elements, the 3 times of daily prayer, the 6 dates of the spiritual calendar, the Mass that crosses oceans without a plane ticket, the offering spoken with the name of the departed, the candle lit before the house wakes up. You have all of that right now, kept inside, ready to use this very night. You also learned that Saint Teresa of Jesus walked through that same wound, that she climbed onto the mule in 1567, leaving the grave of her father behind, and that for years she built in each new cell of each Carmel a small sacred space from which her love reached Don Alonso with no geography able to stop it, and that those suffrages offered from far away, with the weight of impossibility folded inside the prayer, reached the soul of her father loaded with a spiritual dignity she herself hadn't expected to find when she first began. And you learned the hardest thing of all, that the guilt that wakes you at 3 in the morning has no real moral substance, that you emigrated out of obedience to Providence and not out of abandoning your loved ones, and that the soul of your departed, from the side where clarity no longer has limits, knows it. She sees you, she understands you, and she awaits you with a peace this world cannot give you whole yet, but which from today you can already taste in advance every time you light a candle with her name on your lips. That foretaste, my daughter, is the closest thing to heaven you are allowed to touch while you remain here. Touch it with care, touch it with reverence, because it is real and it is yours, and you earned it by staying to hear everything that had to be heard. All of that, my dear, you received this afternoon at no cost beyond staying with me, and all of that you carry with you when you leave here. Now let me tell you about something else, because the soul who learns to love her departed at a distance with these concrete gestures begins to discover, almost without realizing it, that this same spiritual intimacy with the world beyond has also a bright underside, an underside that deeply changes the way one prays for oneself, the way one thinks of one's own death, the way one prepares for that moment that sooner or later comes for us all. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew this better than anyone. Her nuns told it afterward. The more she prayed for her departed, the lighter the idea of her own death became. The more concrete suffrages she offered for the souls being purified, the more clearly she understood that she too was on her way there, and that if she had loved well on this earth, there would be loved ones who in turn would accompany her from this side when her own time came to leave. There is something very few people ask themselves honestly, and perhaps you have not yet been able to ask yourself, either because the pain of grief at a distance was filling everything. The question is this: when I leave this life, will there be someone on the other side of my miles to accompany me with suffrages from her own home, with a full heart and a candle lit? And the answer, my dear, depends in great part on what you do now. Because love for the departed, when it is practiced with steadiness and with concrete gestures, teaches those who live with you and those who watch you that the departed deserve that kind of care. And that teaching, without your having to say it in words, prepares the ones who come after you to give you the same care when your moment arrives. Your children watch you light the candle for their grandmother every morning. Your grandchildren hear the name of the departed spoken aloud on the day of his anniversary. Your closest family sees the photograph of the one who left still on the altar, that the love for the absent does not grow cold with the years, that geographical distance was never an excuse to stop accompanying with prayer. That, my daughter, enters them even if they do not know it. And one day, when your turn comes to leave for the Lord, someone from that family is going to light a candle with your name, because she will have learned that it is done, that it matters, that it reaches its destination, that someone will have learned it from you. There is a teaching of Saint Teresa of Jesus. Her Carmelite daughters have kept generation after generation, and I want to leave it with you before I say goodbye. In a faithful paraphrase gathered by her daughters, She would say that the soul who learns to pray for her, departed with concrete and constant love, is preparing herself, without knowing it, for the moment when she herself will need that prayer from the other side. That love exercised for those who left is like an account opened in the bank of heaven, an account the soul of the living one will find full of interest when her turn comes to cross. That is the logic of Christian love for the departed, my daughter. What you give comes back. What you offer for your loved ones will offer for you. That generosity spreads among those who live with it year after year, with no one having to ask for it. I am not telling you this so you pray for your departed out of a selfish calculation. I am telling you because it is worth knowing that this love, the one you have been learning to practice this afternoon with your concrete forms and your home altar and your 6 dates of the spiritual calendar, comes back to you doubled. It comes back as inner peace the world cannot give. It comes back as a closeness to heaven the person who never prays for her departed never experiences. And it comes back as a preparation for one's own dying that no human philosophy can teach. There is still more that Saint Teresa of Jesus left written on how to accompany the soul of the departed from one's own home, on the objects of devotion that multiply the effectiveness of those suffrages, on the specific prayers the Carmelite tradition has kept for dealings with the souls in purgatory. All of that is in the video that comes next. I prepared it thinking of you, of the person who has already built the home altar and already requests the Mass at a distance and already marks the 6 dates on the calendar, and who still feels she lacks one last step for the love to cross the ocean with the greatest force it can carry. That last step is there. The Lord has already placed it on your path this afternoon for you to find. And now, my daughter, let me take my leave of you with a heart full of gratitude that you stayed, for having held up under the truth that hurts before it heals, for having received this teaching of Saint Teresa of Jesus with the readiness of someone who knows there is something to change and has the courage to change it. In her own words, Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote that the soul who gives herself entirely to God loses nothing of what she loved on this earth. She finds it all again, purified and eternal, in the hands of the Lord who keeps everything. May that promise stay with you tonight, my daughter. May the candle you light before going to bed shine on the name of the departed loved one you carry. And may the Lord, who sees the miles that separate you from that distant grave, with the love you carry within, draw that soul to His presence with a mercy no distance can stop. May God bless you. And may Saint Teresa of Jesus walk hand in hand with you until you are able to meet your loved ones again on the other side of every ocean.